Lovely to see everybody. I won't talk for very long. It's really just to kind of give an impulse in terms of a place and then how that place is connected with the Horizon Europe program pace setters. So just to kind of locate ourselves in place, I'm going to talk about one of the pueblos blancos of Andalusia called Genalguacil, which is deep in the Serranía of Ronda in the southernmost tip of Europe and looks across to Morocco across the Straits of Gibraltar. So we're talking about the edges of Europe. It's a village which is a very large territory, as it includes mountain ranges, rivers, and forests. However, the village in and of itself is now somewhere around 500 citizens. So, and it obviously suffers with the usual kind of issues that rural regions deal with in terms of, particularly in this area, to do with climate transition, droughts, etc., depopulation, all the usual things that I think everybody knows about. However, Genalguacil decided to take a slightly unusual process, which was activity driven by the citizens 30 years ago, which was actually to look at arts and culture as a way to kind of address or fight against rural depopulation. So rather than focusing on other issues, they really thought, what could we do that would make us slightly different and what connects to our own heritage? So there is basically activities related to the concepts of arts and culture, the relationship of arts and culture to nature and heritage, and how these can actually build capacity through creative confidence. And one of the key things here, and I think it touches on a lot of the stuff that was talked about earlier, is this idea that by understanding kind of moving beyond the kind of stereotypes of the rural as these kind of backward conservative places is really to understand how there is value in the expertise that exists within rural communities, so the rural intelligence, and to give that a contemporary create a contemporary heritage narrative. So over since 1994, there's been basically a sequence of initiatives which have gone very slowly and have been self-organized collectively through the village in collaboration with the town hall to develop a series of artistic residencies, programs, exhibitions, and also to develop a contemporary art museum. And then in the last 3 years, also moving towards the innovation space, built on this kind of trajectory, and then we'll come to pace setters. So I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of doing this kind of work. Marginality, but I think it's not necessarily always to do with physical infrastructure. You can still get to airports and train stations. I think often it's to do with the fact that it's not considered to be part of the kind of urban creative classes. So therefore there becomes a forms of social exclusion rather than necessarily things that are always kind of the immediate things as, where's the nearest hospital, where's the nearest school, but actually things that to do with much more to do with kind of more the idea of access to knowledge or where knowledge resides. So this kind of marginalization out of the urban tech centers and how that relates to innovation. Also, the kind of principal practices, I think, to do with our current economic model of extractivism. So the rural regions really recognized as either a place for relaxation as a tourist or as a place for moving primary materials that then get moved to cities. So I think those kind of things is a kind of one that's related to kind of more social or cultural factors and one that's more related to kind of economic factors in terms of how we currently organize ourselves. And obviously the issue of capacity. So because most people we have an aging demographic challenge. And obviously attracting talent and retaining talent remains complicated. So some of the challenges, the way to kind of flip them to opportunity was to engage with complexity. So to understand, okay, how do you actually understand economic models in new ways? How do you create collective approaches? So rather than looking for something that's a top-down solution, so what can happen in place by people collaborating with each other, in this case, basically neighbors and neighbors working with artistic institutions, universities, so reaching out beyond what would normally be considered to be the day-to-day activities of a village. And I think importantly is this notion of care. So to care for relationships and also to care for time. So you see a 30-year set of activities that very slowly develop towards an initiative and is to understand that sometimes things take time and to take care for that time rather than rush towards things that might be the usual approach. And most importantly, that things are embedded in people's everyday lives. So Paolo was talking about this before. This isn't sort of alien spaceships that come from us out. This is really something that's generated with and by the community as a way of understanding themselves. If you go to the museum, you will see everybody's name represented on the wall as its owners. Um, so one of the questions we have was how do we reframe innovation? So, and again, this was touched on by Eduardo, is like moving beyond the kind of science and technology model, but something that understands more place-based, more community orientated, more relationships to arts and culture. So one of the questions that we have, so we're also a mix of researchers as well as artists, as well as technologists, is really how do you create generative forms of innovation? How do you have decentralized models of innovation? And what's the notion of justice? So we have, so out of this kind of collective civil society exercise, we are now partners in the Horizon Europe project. We're one of the first Horizon Europe projects that actually is looking at artistic research and is particularly focused on remote and rural regions and how we can kind of keep the pace and set the pace of the climate transition. In this, we also mean the digital and social transition, but particularly through models of innovation that relate to arts and culture and also that create co-research environments conscious of the fact that academic institutions have very different conditions in the everyday lives of someone in a rural community. But what does it mean to co-create value? So the notion of everyone is an expert and how there can be different forms of value exchange in order to understand how we can generate knowledge and generate meaningful innovation platforms within place. Um, so some of the work in progress is basically looking at ownership models. So how does something stay in the collective? How is it open source? And how does it actually contribute to the commons? So the activities of Genalguacil are basically owned by the collective and sit in common ownership. And one of the things that we're looking at in Paysetters is that this same principle exists, that everything that we do is open source, that everybody is recognized, and also how does it become something that can function for the general common good. Also, we have questions around governance. How do you continue to support activities like this? So we have work looking at how to generate a foundation that exists on these particular principles, and also to understand that economic development takes time. So I think there's always a huge push between the kind of traditional research model that we have, which is kind of like, here's a question, there's a process, nobody kind of collaborates, and then we have an outcome. But it's really understanding that they're all just parts of understanding how a Horizon Europe can relate to an Erasmus, can relate to a Creative Europe, or can relate to actually crowdsourcing or whatever, or crowdfunding that allows us to generate activities that are allowed to take longer periods of time to change and develop. So that was my piece in terms of a rapid introduction to a very complex space. But I was given a 3-minute briefing that I had to talk for 3 minutes about the two things. So hopefully that worked.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You did very well for time. Thanks. And it was very also, I think, very comprehensive and very informative. If I can have a first like quick question to you, because you still I have to say sort of general level describing the different things that are happening. Can you give one practical example? For example, you said that there were people's names in the museum. Can you explain what were the objects that were presented there and how come that there were, that people's names found their way there? Could you just to make it
Yeah,
a
I
little bit
mean,
more tangible? Yeah.
absolutely. So there is a contemporary art museum, which is like listed as number 10 in Spain. So in terms of its cultural relevance. And on the wall as you enter the museum, so in the stairway, as you walk between the exhibition halls, there are literally the names of every single villager on the wall because the collection, the activities of the museum are created and are in the ownership of the village. So they are basically recognized as that this is something that is made by and shared by the community, both the community that visits for a day as well as the community that lives permanently. So obviously the names on the wall are those people who are registered living in Genalguacil as active both collaborators, contributors, and owners of the collection and of its activities. And all of the artistic programs, which also includes artistic programs and artistic research programs, are all basically co-research activities. So they are not an artist comes to Genalguacil, does their thing, and then goes back to Madrid or Berlin. They work with the community to create objects that make sense with the community, and then they're in the ownership of the community. So the art does not leave the village. So it stays in the village. It is either displayed in public exhibition or in the museum itself. And also it stays in the collection. And through the series that are made as part of that, so these are well-known artists, the museum is able to generate income through selling accessible artworks. That's one approach. The other approach is obviously collaboration with academic institutions internationally. For example, I'm in Norway right now because we work with the Norwegian University of Science and Technology to develop basically place-based and open source research and education activities, one of them being pace setters, for example, but also where we have student internships, student residencies, so that people can spend time. And I think the idea as well is that they don't come for short periods of time. They're developing over years a network and an ability to work not only within Genalguacil, but other rural regions. So it's very small scale, but on purpose in terms of creating small environments where people can build things collectively, slowly, but connect them across Europe. So proper grassroots, as Frederick says. Yes.
Yes.
But
Yes.
grassroots including, policymakers from the European Commission and
Yes.
researchers, as well as a goat farmer. Yeah.
Yes. How to link the grassroots indeed with a much higher
Much more.
level, and how to keep the ownership, the local ownership. I think this is the very interesting answer that you're providing to that big question. Okay, and then we have or maybe sorry, because I didn't give really the audience a chance to. Do you have questions to Joe specifically on this project? Something you would like or a comment? I don't know. Antonio, are you
Yeah,
raising a hand? Yes. Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
please. So first of all, Joe, it was extremely inspiring. Thank you for your presentation. I had a few questions, like curiosity. So first of all, what was let's say, the initial push, let's call it like this, to what kind of challenge the community meant to, let's say, tackle when they initiated the process? And the second, what has been so far during this process? Because as I understood before the Horizon project, there has been history. What has been the role of the municipality during all the process? So if it has always supported, or in some moments no. And finally, how did you build your your network in general, like national, also international? Because for a rural reality like ours, this is one of the challenges. Thank you.
So, yeah, no, I will be remarkably honest. So the original challenge was to do completely with depopulation after so obviously Spain suffered from quite massive depopulation in its rural regions. There was a civil war, there was fascism, there, was a complex set of situations. And so the response was absolutely to fight depopulation. And the initial activities were entirely generated by citizens of the village. I will also admit I am a descendant of that village and just was part of that migration process by my grandparents. So, and then, my mother fell in love with an Englishman. These things happen. And so it was to fight depopulation. A group of citizens came together because they had a network of artists and artisans that they knew. So they thought we can reach out to them because maybe they'll help us. So they reached out to other people and asked for help, and then they asked the municipality for help as well, if they could provide a little bit of seed fund to help them to start to develop something, which was in the first instance, and it started off, and parts of it still continue in the kind of high summer in Andalusia, because that's when families came home from the countries they were living in. So it really was a completely created and in response to basically the kind of rural exodus. The municipality still continues to support the programs of the museum. So in terms of the residencies, the two key residencies, which are called Los Encuentros de Arte and Arte Vivo, which were the two things that kind of were the initial impulse. And then the municipality is and now there's this process of looking at whether or not we can establish or we've started to establish a foundation, because it works at the moment through basically people contribute personally. We have projects from the ministries in Spain or from Horizon Europe, and but it's like slowly building. And I think one of the key structure questions now is this way of collaborating with the municipality in terms of what they're able to do within the limitations of bureaucratic structures in Spain, which are quite significant. In terms of they're very good at spaces, but they're less good at content, for example. So, how do you so this is the question around, okay, so we create a space which is more able to navigate content, but we can collaborate with a space that's more able to navigate infrastructure. And that way kind of piece different tools together to help us understand how to build an ecosystem, basically. So that involves, university partners are very good at understanding the kind of educational net space. If we can open that up through different European activities, then we can open that up without necessarily changing structures, being able to flex and adapt within them. So we have a bit of a puzzle at the moment, which is this kind of governance question. And also this kind of how you can build a kind of an ownership model as well that is more collective. So it's not owned by a single institution. There is a kind of a collective sense of ownership, and that it stays true to its kind of origins, which is something by the commons for the commons.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, many thanks for the question and for the answer, because it really clarifies even further your approach, your philosophy. And then I would like just to move on to the next example, which is from Viola, about rural tourism, slow tourism, in a living lab of slow tourism from Italy, as I understand.
Yes,
Viola, the floor is yours. If you
yes, I will try to share. Okay.
Yes, it seems where you have started. Yes, we can see your. Yes, we
So
can see your presentation.
You can see the presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Let me go full screen. So first of all, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today to tell you something about our living lab. As you mentioned, is a living lab about slow cultural and sustainable tourism, and as being promoted by Romea Strata, so my organization, the LAG Montagna Vicentina, that is the local LAG in the area that we are tackling, within the framework of Ruralities, that is an Horizon funded project. With a huge challenge with more than 50 partners working on a knowledge sharing platform for rural areas. If you want to know more, I will share links later, and you can dig both on the Romea Strata and Ruralities website. So, talking about our living lab, what is quite unique about this living lab is the pilot area you are working on, because it's a territory that has a particularly complex governance, where all the public and private organizations are insisting on the same area, and this made the area quite an interesting place to set a living lab. We had the opportunity to work with a local community that is quite engaged, is quite active from one point of view, and later on I will tell you why this local community also become kind of a challenge for us while we were developing the living lab. Of course, we have been working with good practices, but what we have been doing mostly is identifying trigger cases. So what we have done is to try to understand what specific situations bring and led to innovative solution. Let me show you this really let's say, easy slides to understand what we have done. What we think is that as the Romea Strata, as a cultural itinerary, we think that the cultural, sustainable and slow tourism can be a tool for development. So what we do is that we work with stakeholders easily. We identify them. We identify those among them that are more interested in working with us and in understand more about what innovation and a living lab can bring to their particular reality. And we're trying to inspiring and to let's say guide them in replicating good practices. But what we want to understand more is which keys are triggering the innovation. So where are those particularly specific, maybe a person or a specific organization, a small SMEs that is doing something really particular that is leading to an innovative solution for a specific problem. So what we think is that this kind of approach will drive the local impact, and in this way we will support the community later on. Of course, in the case of the Smart Altopiano Living Lab, we are working in a LAG area, so a local action group, and the main challenge that they have is to fight in the depopulation. So, as I was mentioning before, we have been facing a couple of big challenges. So, the first one was the puzzle governance. I was mentioning in the beginning that we have this particular area where we have the local municipalities, the mountain union, the local DMO, so the touristic organization. They are all insisting in the same area, and this was really a plus when we were identifying the stakeholders, organizing the policy collection and so on. But then when we try to move forward to the implementation, so to do something actually on the field, all those actors, all these organizations start, fighting and not agreeing on how to move forward. And this was quite complicated to overcome. But luckily for us, we had the LAG. So the LAG Montagna Vicentina is really acting as a binding force in the area because they have been working really well on distributing funds, support, the capacity building of the area. So we were lucky enough to work with them, and they were the binding force that overcome this governance that was kind of puzzled. Then we have a strong resistance, especially within the public administration, to each change that is coming both from the bottom or from up. So we decided that we need to give a primary role to private partners in our living lab. So we have not established location for the living lab. So the living lab is intangible and is mobile. So we are moving the activities from one place to the other within the pilot area. And we are doing the field activities, the on-site activities, mainly on private, with private partners. So we are doing a small B&B or with restaurants. So all locations are given by private partners. What we are doing, so we pick some of the topics that our stakeholders pointed us to be interesting for them and complicated for them to approach because they feel that they have not enough skills or expertise or connection to approach those type of activities. And we are giving them online, of course, but also on-site tools to deal with this kind of topics. So we are training them, and we are working with them on gamification, so how to use the gamification to build a different type of offer of tourism in the area. Of course, accessibility, that is a huge topic within the tourism industries in these recent years. We are supporting them in the promotion of the local tourism activities. So we are building shared opportunities where everybody can have a small piece of visibility, and they can also test new tools of visibility. Most of all, we are trying to raise their capacity to attract funds. So we have established this newsletter from one side, and from the other side, we also have this expert support. So people that can be contacted in order to have more details about a funding opportunity that a specific stakeholders has been identified, or maybe they have a project that they want to implement and they don't know how to find this kind of funds in order to start, to, as was mentioning before, to have the opportunity to build from scratch something. Plus, we are also, in the case of bigger stakeholders, we are also inviting them in participating in project that we are writing or implementing. I was really quick because I want to leave the opportunity for everybody to, share impression and ask question. I just want to say one more thing is that we are acting local. So as I mentioned, we are in this small area that is northeast of Italy, and this a plateau, so it's a closed area. But as Romea Strata, we are managing a really long itinerary, is more than 4,000 kilometers. So our idea is also that this living lab can be somehow for us a beta test. And then when we have been able to learn as much as we can, we will be able to bring this in other areas. We are working with the local action groups all along the itinerary. So our idea is to use Smart Altopiano as a test and then scale up. Thank you.